All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a study session video. This one is going to not focus on looking through a whole game, but I actually got a request from a viewer to talk about the very first move of the game. And I figured I would extend that to just talk about round one in general. So you'll see I have a million tabs open here. And what I've done is basically just open 2 games from everybody in the top 10. And we will look at how they all handle round one play. And some things that I'm going to be looking for are the upper row versus lower row prioritization. So in the beginner to master series, I talk about actually focusing on getting development of your lower rows versus your upper rows. Obviously, we still want to get our upper rows, but not prioritizing a specific set of upper row tiles or making sure that we get some development of our lower rows first. So we'll see how people handle that. And, prioritizing lower rows is something that I kind of picked up when I was learning the game and viewing people like Sapperlot and Queen Dong studying their games. So we'll see if that holds true, actually, or if my kind of memory is wrong about that. There's also like how much to prioritize the lower rows versus the upper rows. Next is column selection. So again, in the beginner to master series, and if you view any of my games, you'll see that I very frequently build column 2. And I think I talk about that in episode 8 of the beginner to master series, but I'll talk about it again when I view one of my own games here. Another is shape of the upper rows. So something that gets taught to beginners is that building staggered can actually be better than building straight. And I have a little example here that I'll walk through in a second. But my sense is that top players don't really care about this. But let's see if that's actually true. Maybe it's more common than I think. Another thing is first player prioritization. So I've said that I like having the first player tile in the second round if possible. Helps to like finish out a row 4 or row 5, to have that first pick to not get blocked. But we'll see how other players handle it. And then also just like blocking in round 1. It's a little like playing defensively in round 1 is a little different than the other rounds because it's not always clear what your opponent is going to build. So, you could assume they're building column 4 if they start with row 2 red, but maybe then they pivot to column 3. So it's not always clear like how to defend in round 1 or if you should defend in round 1. Okay, so getting into the shape of upper rows, pretend these are the top 2 rows of an Azul board. If you start round 1 like this with your top 2 tiles stacked, you'll get 3 points. And then when you play your round 2 tiles next to them, you get 2 points and then 4 points. So you get 6 for a total of 9. But if you start with them staggered, then you only score 2 points in round 1, but then you get 4 and 4 in round 2 for 8 points, and you get a total of 10. So it's a 1 point difference, but technically it is better to stagger your start than to start straight. Now, there's other considerations. For example, like in this example, this tile is yellow, and this tile is red, so then you need red and yellow. I'm sorry, then you need black and yellow. I should just look at a board. I don't even remember the colors. So like you've started with 2 red tiles here. So maybe if, black and yellow were really common, then you're relying on getting both of those. Maybe the better example is here, where you need yellow on row 1 and yellow on row 2. So like if there were a lot of yellow in the first round, then you're probably not going to be able to get this in round 2. So having them staggered in this direction versus in this direction could be tougher. The other thing that Admitted, who will see some of his games, pointed out to me is while this gap is only 1 point, 10 to 9, let's say you take negatives in round 1, and you end up at like 0 in each of these cases. Now, being staggered is actually better because now it's a 2-point gain. So it's 8 versus 6. So the reason that the straight tiles get you more points in round 1, whereas the staggered get you more points in round 2. So if you're going to be at 0 anyway in round 1 because you're taking negatives, then staggered becomes even more better, if that's correct English, than straight. So that is something to kind of think about. Like, obviously you could also take negatives in round 2 and then this advantage is diminished. So all that to say, like, I have never paid very much attention to the shape of my upper rows because it has always struck me as a lower priority than other things. Like, I would rather block one of my opponent's tiles than have a staggered instead of straight construction. So personally, I've never cared about this, but we'll see if other players do. Okay, so let's dive right in. I am going to start with my own games just because I can explain them a bit better since I played them. So in this scenario, this is an interesting one because there's 4 groups of 3. So this is a pretty uncommon situation, and maybe actually not like the best example for this video, but basically what I'm looking at here is when there's a situation like this with these like 2 groups of 3 reds, or let's say it was 2 groups of 3 blacks, you know that you can be guaranteed to get one of them. So immediately I'm thinking, okay, like column 2, I can be guaranteed to get 3 reds on row 5, which is really good. So choosing between white and blue kind of becomes about what's available in the 2 groups of 3. So in this case, I'm going to choose white on row 3 because I know I can get that and then progress on my row 5. Additionally, it's fairly likely my opponent will take the 3 blue, and so they will basically be blocked on white already because I've taken white. There's only 1 more white. So if it were the case that these groups of reds were blacks instead of reds, then I would take blue and guarantee myself the 3 blacks. But because of these reds, I'm taking the whites and guaranteeing myself 3 reds. Here my opponent does take the blues. And again, like, because these 2 piles of reds are still available, I don't feel the need to take one right now. And as I said, I like having the first player tile in round 1. So I decide to take the red tile from the center so that I can start in round 2 and I'm still guaranteed these reds. Now, this was maybe a little bit of oversight because you'll see that things do get kind of weird for me. So my opponent takes these yellows, and now I'm in a situation where to secure my row 2 and ensure that I get one of these groups of 3 reds, I have to take these blacks on row 2, where ideally I'd like to have them on row 4. So I actually wonder if instead of taking that 1 red and getting the first player tile, if I should have actually just taken these 2 yellows and secured my row 2, and that way I could put these reds and blacks all towards row 4 and just collect like this 1 blue or this 1 white onto row 1 towards the end of the round. So I now have to do this. My opponent wisely makes a dent in my reds. And we'll just flip through the end of the round. So here, making a defensive play, taking this white, since my opponent has now committed to the middle column. So nothing too surprising for these last plays. But if you look at where I am at the end of this round, it's a little awkward, right? Like I'm completely disconnected up top. I've made no progress on my row 4 black. So I do question if this row 1 red play was correct. I wonder if taking those 2 yellows and just securing my row 2 would have been better. Okay, so we'll view another one from me. And here I am not the first player. And this board is pretty well balanced. It's not only 2 reds, but the other colors are all 4 or more. And my opponent decides to build the second column. And I said I would talk about why building the second column is potentially advantageous. I think I probably overdo it, to be honest, and we'll see like how often my competitor, or not my competitors, the other people that I have game replays for choose to build the second column. But the idea is basically that when you build the second column, you need row 4 black and row 5 red. And red in particular is hard to defend because most likely your opponent is going to build one of the other 2 central columns. And if they build one of these columns, they only need like 3 reds throughout the whole game. Most people are going to finish row 1 and finish row 2, so that's 3 reds, and then they don't need any other red. So your ability to get row 5 red is greater, basically, because to defend against this, they need to either like take row 4 or row 3 red, which often can be pretty awkward because they're on the edge. They're like large investments on the edge of the board. And ideally, we want to be investing in the center of the board. The other thing about the second column is that the most needed color in the game is white. White is rows 3, 4, and 5 of the central column. And then, of course, both players want it for the top 2 rows. So when you build column 2, you need the fewest white relative to building column 3 or column 4. So it's hard for your opponent to defend red, and you don't need as much white to complete your column, so you have less competition there. And additionally, it's not too awkward for you to defend white because you need it for rows 1 and 2, but also like if you can start building row 4 white, that's a nice tile to have. Most likely you're going to have like some action in this area anyway, versus like building row 4 red over here on the edge. So that's the reason why building column 2 is, in my opinion, good. Obviously, like it depends on the draw, so you don't just want to force it. But yeah, and I should give credit to MagKey 1988, who's the first one to introduce me to this idea of row 2 being, or column 2 being, a preferable column to build. Now, in this situation, my opponent is building it. And this is a bit tough because, as I said, I like having the first player tile. So I don't really want to like take these blacks or these blues and give my opponent the opportunity to grab the first player tile with a nice development play for them as well. And similarly, I mean, any other factory will put a white in the middle and then they just take the white. So I don't remember this exactly, but I'd be reasonably confident that I just take this red here. It also like sort of lets me defend red. There's only 2 anyway, but I suspect I'll take the red and then kind of see what my opponent does. And one of the nice things here is, you know, a good play for them would be to take the 2 black, but doing so puts 3 blue in the center. So bit of defense for me. Okay, so they take the blue. And so now we're going to get into like blocking in round 1. And obviously my opponent wants black. They aren't like hard committed to this column, but this is ideal for them. So I'm going to take these black. I'm almost sure of it. And the question is which column to build. And this is a situation where I don't hate competing for the same column because I have the first player tile. So I can start working on black row 4. It looks like I'll have opportunities to get some white row 3 and then just blue or yellow for my row 2. Whereas, I mean, building the center column's not bad either. I can't threaten to like complete row 4, which I can in this round if I go for column number 2. But the other thing with building the center column is I do expect there to be a lot of reds next round because there's only 2 in this round. And I've already taken one. So like, as I was talking about earlier, it's going to be really awkward for me to defend the reds that are likely to come in round 2 if I build the center column. So I think I probably compete on column 2. Yeah. My opponent takes black to immediately shut down my ability to complete this. And here I think I probably just start building white. One thing to think about is I can try to get 3 blue or 3 yellow into the center. So it's not a lost cause on row 3. So that would be one reason not to take white, is to try to get one of these row 3s. And actually just like taking 1 black and putting 3 yellow in the center puts my opponent in a pretty awkward position. They have to decide what to do with these 3 yellow. Do they let me get them or not? So this is probably a case actually where I think I probably make a play to group up the blues or yellows. Obviously I can't group up the blues in one go right now, but the yellows can get grouped and I can threaten to complete a row 3. Okay, so yeah, by doing this, I think my idea is to get either all of the yellows or all of the whites in the center. My my opponent should just finish their row 3 white. Yeah. And then I get the same outcome of here's 3 yellows in the center. My opponent now has to decide what to do with them. And in this case, if I were them, I would just throw them out. I'm very averse to building on the edges. Maybe wrongly so. Maybe it's worth building on the edges. But I would just take these yellows and throw them out. Negative points in round 1 are not a big deal. So it is worth blocking my row 3, but not worth sticking yourself on the edge. I think they do play them, yeah. And I'll take these whites here. They take the red. And that's the end of the round. So, again, like, not the best looking situation for me. Headed into round 2, it's kind of wonky, but having the first player tile here helps. I can, take these 2 red, for example, on row 5 right away, and shut down their ability to finish row 4. Could take these 2 yellows, put pressure on their row 5. Okay, so that's all of my games. Now we'll move on to Enos, and I'm getting the sense that I won't be able to get through even close to all of these games by the end of the video. I'm already at 20 minutes. Okay. So Enos is not first here. And if I were Josh, I would probably just play these 3 whites on row 3. Okay, so as I talked about in my games, I would probably just take this 1 red to prioritize the first player tile in round 2. There's nothing else here that's like super juicy. Getting row 2 yellow is basically the only other option. I guess row 2 blue is also another option. And neither of those stand out as like so strong that I need to do them. But I have watched some Enos games, and I kind of suspect that he won't take this red. Yeah, so he just locks in the row 2. Josh takes the red. And now let's see what Enos does. I think the 2 blue on row 3 is pretty reasonable here. It does put these blacks together for your opponent to get row 4 development started, but I'm not seeing much else. I guess the other thing to do would be to start working on row 5 black maybe, as a defensive play. But we'll see. I think I would end up just taking the blues and letting them have this, and then defending blacks later. An interesting choice could be blues on row 4, because there are these 3 yellows left. Unlikely that you get row 3 yellow, but you could at least create the threat. But Enos takes 1 black, so I guess in a way you could think about this as like defending blacks, but he's just putting it on row 1 instead of on row 5, and he's leaving himself open to picking any column still. But I think likely that this black play is about defending row 4 black. Now, we could also talk about the positioning here. So he did create this staggering, and there's only 3 reds in this round, so it's somewhat likely he'll be able to get both row 1 and row 2 red next round. But I think probably the main purpose is working to defend row 4 black, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see him take more black as the round goes on. So this is interesting, and I think a mistake. Working on on column 3 when you've already dedicated 3 white tiles on column 2 is a bit dicey, because now you need 7 more whites for the rest of the game. And 4 of them have already come in this round, so it's not like we should expect a lot of whites next round. Whereas playing on column 4, like, we can expect a lot of reds next round. So I'm not sure about this column switch. I think this is going to be potentially problematic for round 2. Now, knowing that it's happened, I wouldn't be surprised to see Enos collect 1 black here. He's got a similar situation to what I had in the last game we reviewed, which is that row 3 blue and row 3 yellow are still on the board. So maybe trying to make a play towards one of those. But I still like the option of just grabbing 2 blue on row 3 and guaranteeing it. But let's see what he does. Okay, so takes 1 white, leaves things ungrouped. And his opponent still needs a row 2. Yeah, it'd be interesting to know the logic there. One thing is just, again, it's very unlikely his opponent will be able to get 4 white next round. So maybe it's still just like defensive play here. Okay, so that was fairly expected. The thing that Enos can't do now is group these blues together, because his opponent can just play 4 blue. So that's so he's out on row 3. So I think at this point you just take the 2 blue from the center on row 3, and then his opponent will probably defend by taking these 2 blue, and then he gets to collect 2 black for row 5. So that's kind of what I would expect here. Okay, his opponent doesn't defend. So here's a question of like building versus defending. To me, I think you just take the 2 blues, your opponent gets another black, but I think completing row 3 is more valuable than taking 1 black in this situation. But of course I'm wrong. Enos takes the black. And one thing he will do is dump negatives on his opponent. But he's also going to be negative, so this doesn't really, like, it's 1-0. So yeah, fascinating to see that choice of building versus defending. So he chose to take 1 tile away and give up having a completed row 3. And I certainly would have done that differently, but Enos is currently number 1 in the world, so you can't criticize that play. Just have to try to learn from it. But you can see, and this draw actually was quite favorable for Josh. There's a lot of black and a fair amount of white, even though those were 2 of the more common colors last round. So okay, so that's the first Enos game. Definitely some interesting stuff there. I think we saw like some pretty extreme round 1 defending, which was one of the things that I highlighted as something to look for. And you can see like as soon as his opponent committed to blacks, I mean, he took this one black earlier when it looked like his opponent was going to build row 2 or column 2. But yeah, just single tiles here as defensive maneuvers. Didn't even care about finishing row 3, would rather have this one black than let his opponent have 3. Okay, let's view another one. Okay, so here Enos gets the start and talked a bit about these large groupings of 3 earlier and how to handle them. Now, black is an interesting color because we generally don't want to be building on the edges. So like just playing 3 black is not great. So the question here is basically like row 4 or row 5 black, or do you take white knowing that you can get 3 black on row 4 or row 5? So you could go, row 3 black, row 2 white, or you could try to go row 2 white, row 3 black. But yeah, I think it's kind of interesting actually, like building column 2, obviously I have a bias for it, but building column 2 is kind of interesting because you do have the possibility of getting row 3 white. There's 5 whites versus only like 3 blues. That being said, most likely, I mean, there's only 2 red, there's only 1 yellow. So your row 2 might end up being blue or even white. So it's hard to pass up on row 5 black. But I actually kind of like row 4 black. So this is getting into the column selection. I think ultimately, like with the lens that developing your lower rows is strong, I do think row 5 black's probably correct. And I think I'd take the one with the blue to discourage my opponent from taking the first player tile, since, just having 1 blue up in the left corner is not great. So I think I'd probably take row 5 black from this factory. But as always, Enos making a really interesting play here with row 2 black. And I can guarantee you he's not going to try to build this rightmost column. And so I wonder if this is a play at creating a really early threat for like full color black. The other thing to think about, and this applies outside of round 1, but I was kind of talking to Zeus, who's number 3 in the world, a bit earlier today actually about this, is you want to like optimally use the tiles that are given to you. And what I mean by that is like you don't want to exit this round with no black, which would be very hard to do, but what that does is it creates a situation later in the game where you need black and most of it's already gone. So part of Enos's logic here could be that like I might not build with adjacency in this round, I might not have the optimal upper row structure, but I'm getting these black tiles out of the way, and that means that later in the game, when reds are prevalent, when yellows are prevalent, I'm going to have the space to play them, and then they're going to be built with adjacency because I'm going to have filled out these other blacks, these other black tiles. So it's almost like an insurance policy for later in the game that you're not going to get stuck on black when so many blacks have already come out. So let's see what... Okay, so magnetic holes takes the 3 black. So here I would expect Enos to still take these other 3 black. I don't expect them to go on row 3. I think they will definitely be on row 4 or row 5. And I think the question is which one. And actually taking these 2 black early was maybe kind of brilliant for another reason, which was that I mentioned earlier that like the row 2 possibilities were kind of weird in this round. And so he's now just gotten that out of the way, and he can focus entirely on bottom row development and not have to worry about what's going to happen on his row 2. So yeah, I think still kind of tempted by building column 2. And again, the thing now that has changed is you can no longer complete column 5, but if you start row 5, you can no longer complete row 5 black in column 3, but you can complete row 4 black in column 2. And when it's even better. If you take the 3 black on row 4 and your opponent takes this 1 black, they have grouped the 3 white, and so you'll get your row 3 white. So row 4 black looks really strong here. Yeah. Okay, so the opponent doesn't defend. So here we'll see another like prioritization question of, does Enos prioritize finishing row 4? In which case he'll give his opponent the opportunity to block his row 3 white, or will he prioritize white and finishing row 3? Okay, so he goes for the black. Now, yep. Okay, so this is like a bit weird, but I guess his opponent has to do something, and this is not bad actually because there are blues here. Okay, so Enos has some options here. I would forego defending these blues, and instead here I would take 2 white on row 3, which we need for our column. And what that does is it forces his opponent to either choose row 4 blue or row 2 blue, because once Enos takes these whites, the only grouped tiles are the blues. There's only 1 yellow and 1 red left. So his opponent can either make progress on row 4 or get their row 2, but they can't do both. And Enos just collects 2 whites and then gets a row 1. So, but of course I'm wrong. So opting to try to build row 3 blue. Now, his opponent's still basically in the same situation. There's only one opportunity to get row 2, which is these whites. So his opponent has to choose, do I get my row 2 and let him get row 3, or do I block his row 3 but I don't get row 2? And this is the brilliance of Enos in later rounds at the very least. He does this kind of stuff all the time. I'm a little surprised to see it in this scenario because, at least personally, I wouldn't want to be blocked on my row 3. I've just had too many games where getting stuck on row 3 becomes a bigger problem than I think it's going to be. So like I would be scared of my opponent just taking the 1 blue, but I mean, it comes at a pretty hefty cost. So, yeah, so Enos successfully completes a row 3. And the rest is pretty straightforward. So super interesting. And I'll say that I have seen Enos prioritize the second row as his first play in round one more than once. Even situations where he'll take 2 red on row 2 and then continue building column 2, which needs red row 5. And I think the logic has to be that he doesn't want to get stuck later needing both row 2 red and row 5 red in the same round. So he just knocks out the row 2 red, which is like a pretty pivotal tile to have, and then he'll work on row 5 later and doesn't care if it takes him a while. Okay, so moving on to Sapperlot. And we're at 40 minutes, so we'll maybe just finish out Sapperlot and then call it good and do these other games later. Okay, so really interesting round here. Tons of groups of 3, and very much like my first game, the thing that I'm seeing is I'm guaranteed to get a group of 3 red, and so that makes this black more attractive because I can play black row 4 and then red row 5 and have really good development of these column 2 lower rows. So I would be grabbing black row 3 or row 4 and then planning to grab red row 5. But let's see what Sapperlot does. Okay, same thing. Opponent contests. And yeah, I don't see a reason not to grab these reds for row 5. Okay, opponent takes one. So an interesting choice here. There's obviously blocking the completion of the 5th column for our opponent, but could also opt to complete column 4. So if I were to take red here, I think it would go on row 1. Although you could play out the scenarios. But basically, I don't want to end up in a situation where you take red, row 5, and then you get stuck without a row 1 or a row 2. I don't think that's possible here. If you take red, you put 3 colors in the middle. Even if your opponent takes 2 yellow, you can still get both of them. So yeah, so that's not actually not a concern. But I think I might actually opt for completing row 4 here and letting my opponent complete row 5. And I guess the reasoning there would be that completing your row 4 early is nice because then you have guaranteed adjacency on row 5 when you build it, so you're going to get 5 points for row 5. I mean, assuming you get the upper rows. So it's a little bit better to complete row 4 before row 5. The other thing is generally like completing row 4 gives you some better point scoring, future point scoring opportunities. So, being able to build this row 4 white, which could potentially score you like 6 later in the game. It's pretty unlikely that you can do the same on row 5. Most likely you're not going to complete a second column. And so like playing this, being able to start building yellow or black row 5 is probably just going to score you 2 points versus, being able to potentially score 6. So I think I'd probably take the 2 black and just complete my row 4. But Sapperlot defends red, and yeah, like I said, so went for the top row red. And yeah, now the opponent's in a bit of a dicey situation. So if they take 2 black, for example, Sapperlot gets row 3 yellow and then a guaranteed row 2, which might be the reason for not taking the blacks, because now he has a shot of filling the top three rows in addition to having great development already. And this is kind of, one of the things I was talking about at the beginning was, we talk about bottom row development being more important than upper rows, but I have to think it's only to an extent. And so here, like, we see Sapperlot sacrificing the completion of a bottom row for the potential to still get row 3. So it's not that, like, prioritizing your bottom rows doesn't mean complete them at all costs. It just means you want to have progress made, because you want to be able to work towards your column in the second and third rounds. And so I think what we're seeing here is Sapperlot's basically happy with this progress. And now he's going to try to, do better in the upper rows. Yeah, so we're going to see this play out exactly. So he gets all 3 top rows and has great row 4 and row 5 development. This is like a pretty ideal round 1. Okay, next Sapperlot game. Okay, so again, he's first, and 2 groups of 3 here. This is also a pretty interesting draw. Again, with the prospect of getting either row 3 or row 2 red, a group of 3 or a group of 2 red for row 5, pretty hard for me to ignore just playing row 3 white here. I think this video might be more interesting if we weren't getting so many groups of 3 tiles, but it is important to know how to handle these situations too. So the converse logic of taking the 3 white and then knowing you'll get some red is you could take the 3 red and know that you'll get some white because there's so much white. And so again, this is basically the question we just talked about, which is like, to what extent do you want to develop your lower rows versus, potentially completing row 3? And for me, I think in this situation, I'm thinking I'm going to be happy with my bottom row development, even if it's just 2 red. And so I do want to secure the row 3 because I know it'll be decent. The other thing that could happen in this round is you could pivot to the center column because there's so much white. So having row 3 yellow or row 3 white kind of still gives you some flexibility to move to the center column. Whereas if you take the 3 red, you're totally locked in. And when your opponent takes 3 white, then you're kind of maybe in a weird situation trying to get your row 3 white. So I think I'd just take row 3 white here. Okay, so this is fascinating. So this gets into the column choice question. Like I said, I'm kind of predispositioned or I have a very strong tendency to build column 2. But here we see Sapperlot opting to build column 4. Even though there's all this red, there's like no blue, there's some yellow, but it's easily defendable. So what's the logic here? Part of it could be that Sapperlot expects a lot of blue to come. So he's not worried about the fact that there aren't many blue, and he just wants to get this row 5. And he's got a shot at like row 3 red, which, I talked about not being great in the context of defending, but in this scenario, because you're building column 4, like it does provide some potential future adjacency. Okay, so his opponent takes 1 yellow. So this is interesting because like not taking this 3 red, I mean, obviously it opens up Sapperlot to take it, but by taking 3 red on row 3, he's like shutting down his opportunity at row 3 yellow, which would be slightly better for his column. But I think I think you just have to take it. And you can play it safely on row 3 because there's this group of yellow for row 2 and there's this other group of red for row 2. So that's what I would expect to see. But we see row 2 yellow, or row 3 yellow. Okay, so he's kind of saying, I don't really care that you might get, this row 5 red. I'm just going to build my own thing and he can still defend red. Okay, so this I think is a mistake. I think you should just play that on row 5. For Sapperlot, I think it maybe made a little more sense because he's kind of building on this side. So having row 3 red is fine, but I suspect, Granatonoma here is not going to end up with, end up building a column over here. He's most likely going to end up with column 2 or column 3. Wild. So Sapperlot gets these whites grouped up, which I would think would be detrimental to what he's trying to do with row 5 white. But let's see. So I guess, we can talk about he's happy with his row 5 development, so he really just wants to get row 3. And I guess at this point you take 2 black to prevent your opponent from making... Oh, but actually you can just take 2 red here and then your opponent has to play blacks on row 2 if they want to do that, or they can, skip row 2. The other interesting option, and I think it's probably just 2 red here and force your opponent into 2 black. Yeah. Okay, so the recording's at 53 minutes. So I do think I will stop here, but with the plan to continue on with at least some of these other games. This is like, I didn't realize how long it would take me even to just analyze a round 1, but it seems to be taking like 10 minutes per round 1. So we'll stop here. Let me know in the comments if this has been good or not, if we should continue doing it. I think maybe the more interesting draws are the ones where there aren't a group of 3. It's like, okay, what do you do then? And weirdly enough, we haven't seen many of those. But yeah, hopefully this has been interesting. I think personally, like, I have definitely picked some stuff up. I think the Enos 2 black play was really interesting. That's like definitely one to think about. And yeah, going back to our list, I think we're seeing like prioritization of some development of 4-5, but if you can get 3, definitely at least create that threat. Column selection, I don't know that there's too much to talk about here. I think, like, obviously I built the second column. It's a little harder to suss out, like, I think we'd have to watch a lot of one person's game to see if they have a preference, but I mean, this choice by Sapperlot was definitely interesting to me. to build column 4. I think I would have ended up going for column 2 there. Shape of upper rows, I haven't seen anything. There was, Enos built a staggered situation, but I think it was more based on defensive play, and you kind of see like generally there's interest in like having things align, but the top players are perfectly fine having a row 1 that's like way out in the boonies. And then I think I'm the only one who has prioritized first player. And then especially from Enos, we've seen pretty aggressive blocking in round 1. So yeah, looking forward to finishing this video. And hope this was good, and we will continue to study this in the next one. Thanks.